You don't need fancy AI tools to write research papers for Scopus Index journals. In fact, in this video, I'm going to show you an easy and proven process that you can just copy and paste today to write your research paper introduction in the next 90 minutes without using AI. This will work for any field, regardless of whether you're in chemistry, quantum physics, education, or business. Let's get started, and in this first video, we're going to talk about the overall structure and flow of the introduction. So I'm going to give you the sort of bird's eye view of how to write the introduction, how to structure it to maintain coherent flow. And then in the following videos, we're going to dive deeper into each of the separate sections and write everything out. But I think it's really important to first understand the overall structure and understand how this structure flows so that, you can start planning things and brainstorming ideas. And then, we'll get into the details in the following videos and you'll start writing out your introduction and the literature review. So what are we going to cover today? Well, first of all, we'll look at whether introduction and literature review should go together or whether they should be separate. And then we're also going to look at the overall structure of the introduction. And after that, we'll cover how to maintain coherent flow in the introduction. So in other words, how to tell a coherent story. And this is really, really important because, the introduction is the first piece of your paper that somebody is going to read. Well, maybe apart from the title and the abstract. So, it's the place where you set the scene for the story that you will develop in the rest of the paper. So it's really, really important. And then, I'll also show you how to, brainstorm and map out your initial ideas so that, by the end of this video, you'll have your structure for your introduction and you'll have some initial ideas, which in the following videos, we're going to turn into a beautiful text. So let's get started with, an important question, and the question is whether the introduction and the literature review should be together as one section or they should be separate as two sections. So really, maybe you're not going to like that answer, but that's the truth. It just depends, right? It depends on the field and on that you're in and on the specific journal that you're targeting. So even within the same field, different journals might prefer different things, right? I've also noticed that there is a difference between, a broad difference, let's say, between social and exact sciences. So typically, many social sciences tend to have a separate literature review, right, after the introduction, while exact sciences tend not to do this, right? And I'm using the word tend and typically because, as I said, things can vary even within the same field. So this is a broad generalization, but nevertheless, after, kind of reading hundreds of papers from different fields, this is a pattern that I've noticed. So, what do you need to do right now? Well, first of all, you need to clarify it for yourself in your field. You want to look at 3 to 5 papers from your field on a similar topic to check if the introduction and the literature review are 1 or 2 sections, and then you just want to follow that convention, all right? And you probably already right now might have a good idea because you've probably already read quite a lot of papers from your field, but do that just to check and to make sure. And if you're targeting a particular journal, a new journal that you haven't written for yet, then you also want to check with the guidelines of that journal and previous papers published there to see, how they've done the introduction and the literature review. So now, that we've got that question answered, let's look at the overall structure of the introduction. So the first thing that and maybe before, I go into the details here, let me just emphasize as well that this structure really is the same regardless of the type of paper you're writing. So whether you're writing an experimental paper, some sort of literature review paper, systematic or meta-analysis or so on, or whether you're writing a theoretical or a practical paper, this structure really is the same. And this structure is also really the same across almost all fields and disciplines and journals and so on. There are certain variations on this structure, and I'll point them out, and then we'll go into the details in the following videos. But really, this is a universal structure, right? It's kind of like, the bottom of the iceberg that is below the sea. It's like kind of 90% of the iceberg, and really 90% of papers follow this structure, and then what's on top, the top of the iceberg, the 10-15%, it's kind of like the icing on the cake. There are some slight variations here, but nevertheless there is this underlying structure, right? So I wanted to emphasize that because I think it's important for you to have clarity on that like you can and should use this structure in your field as well. Now, the first element that like 90% of papers will use is the importance of the topic. So basically, here in that first paragraph, you want to answer the question why, this topic should be studied at all. Why should I care as the reader about your topic, right? And that's usually the first thing people do in an introduction. The second thing, which is optional, right, is definition of key concepts, right? So which concepts or terms does the reader need to understand before we can move forward to the research gap, the aim, and the rest of your paper, right? And this is optional. Not all papers do it. In some papers, what you will see that like the definition of the key concepts and the importance of the topic is in the same paragraph and the one and the same thing, right? That can also happen, and we're gonna get into those details in the following video. Now, the third element, which is not optional, it's obligatory, it's overview of the literature. So, basically in here you want to answer the question, what do we know thus far about this topic? And this is the key part of any introduction because it leads us to the research gap and it leads us to the aim of your study, right? It kind of paints the broader picture and sets the scene for the problem and the solution, which is the aim of your paper, right? Now, the next subsection is the research gap, right? So in this paragraph, you basically want to tell us, what do we still not know? What knowledge is lacking, right? What are some of the problems that your paper will solve? And typically, this is a separate paragraph, but sometimes it's kind of included as part of the literature review paragraphs. And then, of course, the aim of your study, so what are you going to do? Right, and this aim should of course be connected to the research gap and then should flow out of the literature review as well. And then we've got the main results and contributions, which is an optional element. So some researchers, after the aim of the study, they tell us like what results and contributions their study made, right? So this is typical in fields like, for example, economy. I've seen that a lot. So do take a look at papers in your field, and the reason for including this is basically to straight away inform the reader why your paper is important, what novel contributions is your paper making. Of course you will talk about them in the discussion and the conclusion section, but it is also beneficial for the reader to know that straight up in the introduction. And the last element, which is also optional, is the structure of your paper, right? So basically, how will the rest of your paper be structured, right? And you just, in one paragraph, you present the organization of your paper, right? So that's kind of the basic structure of the introduction with some variation for the optional elements, right? So now what we want to do is prepare your own introduction blueprint, right? And I prepared a worksheet for you, and it's just called Introduction Blueprint, and it's available in the materials section above this video, right? So I'll open it right here. So it's Introduction Blueprint Worksheet, right? So the first thing that you want to do is check the average length of the introduction against similar papers in your field, right? And you might already have a good idea if you worked through week 1 of the program when we looked at the research paper blueprint, right? But now we just want to focus on the introduction because the introductions are of various lengths, and I've given you the benchmarks here, so you're sort of aiming for like between 500 and 1000 words approximately, right? But it could be, it varies greatly, really, you know, so you want to check in your field. Like I've seen introductions in medicine that are like 3 paragraphs, basically, like sort of like 500 words. And then there are introductions that I've seen that are more than 1,000 words. So it really does depend on the field. And, you know, you want to have the average length in your field here, so you know what you're aiming for, right? So do that first. And once you've done that, you want to look at the elements of the introduction that are listed in the table and compare them against the papers in your field, right? So in here, I've listed the elements that we've discussed, and I've also listed the suggested length in paragraphs or in sentences, right? And the purpose of each of the elements, which we have already discussed, so I'm not going to go over it again. But what you need to do basically is to go through introductions in your field and check which of the elements are present, right? So probably importance of the topic, brief literature review, research gap, and research aim will definitely be present. But what about the definition of key concepts, main results, structure of the paper? If it's not present, then just delete it from here, right? Delete the entire row, okay? And then you just delete it like this, right? So it's not here and you're not gonna bother with it, right? And then what you also want to check is the length, right? And here I gave you the approximate length, right? But this can vary, so do take a look how long things are and adjust it, right? Whether it's 1 paragraph, 2 paragraphs, or so on, right? And also check if the elements are presented in the same order. They should be. 90% of the introductions will have exactly the same order, but do check that in your field, right? And the approximate length. So I already talked about the length in here, so adjust that, all right? So that's your task for now. You can pause the video and do it right now, and then we'll move on to the next aspect. Now, you also, you will have read introductions from your own field, but I've also prepared 2 models for you, and they're also available in the materials section. And the reason why I've prepared them is also to show you how, in different fields and different journals, people write the introduction and the literature review as well. So, I'd recommend taking a look at these models and also analyzing them. So we've got an introduction model in here, right? So this is from, neurosciences about Alzheimer's disease, right? And, I'm not going to go over it in a lot of detail, but you can very quickly see the elements that we've discussed. So we've got the definition of the topic, and really, these definitions in here, they also give us the importance of the topic, right? Then, we've got the literature review in here, right? About the previous meta-analysis and what has been done on the topic, right? And another paragraph of the literature review in here, right? And then in here with this, although, that's very clear, the researcher introduces the research gap and the problems, right? And, further kind of tells us what has been done, right? Right? And then, there's more of a literature review in here. And then in here, we've got the research gap again, right? And then the aim. So you can notice like that the pattern is basically the same with some small variations, right? So, a researcher introduces a problem and then reviews the literature, how the literature has approached this problem, right? And then states the gap again in here, right? And then the aim is stated in the same paragraph as the research gap. And you will notice that there is no results in here and there is no summary of the organization, right? But the overall pattern is the same. So that's one model. And then we've also got introduction and literature review model, right? The reason why I included it, this is a paper I co-wrote with a colleague of mine, and I'm including it not because I wrote it with a colleague, but because it follows a completely different pattern. Because in here you'll see that there is an introduction, but then there is a separate literature review section, right? So if you look at it, it still follows the same pattern, the introduction. It's just that it's much shorter, right? Because we review the literature later in much more detail. So we've got a definition of the topic and also the importance of the topic in here, right? It's again kind of one and the same thing, right? And then, we talk about the extensive research that has been done, but just very briefly. And then, we introduce the research gap in here, right? This is all the research gap, right? And then, we state the aim in here, right? So it's still exactly the same pattern. It's just that then we dive deeper into those different, aspects of the literature in a separate literature review section, right? And as we do that, we also point out the research gap, like little is known about, right? Less is known about the representation, right? And then again, we state the gap in here, and then we state the aim, right? So it's kind of the same, very similar pattern. So you can take a look at these two examples just to see how, how different researchers apply this pattern that we've talked about, and how, an introduction in literature review in one section or in two sections differ. All right, so let's talk now about the coherent flow in the introduction and how you can maintain it. So first of all, we always want to go from general to specific, right? That's why, we start with the importance of the topic, the definition, and then we move to more specific things like the literature on the topic and the research gap and the aim for your study, right? You can't first present the aim, right? You need to set the scene for it. And that's what makes a paper flow. Now, you also want to include all the elements in the typical order for your discipline, right? So if there is some slight variation in your discipline, then you want to follow it, right? Because if most people in your discipline do it like that, then you also want to follow that pattern. And also paragraphing. So you want to start a new paragraph when moving to a new element of the introduction, right? So when you move from the literature review to the research gap, you want to start a new topic. Or when you move to, a different subtopic, you also want to start a new paragraph, right? And we'll see how this is done. I'm going to show you how this is done exactly in the models that I've shown you, right? But the last thing is to maintain logical links, right? So we talked about those logical links in day 4 of week 1, right? So we mentioned linking words, we mentioned relative clauses, words like this, that, another, and so on, right? So let's see how, just very briefly, how is this done? How do they maintain the logical flow in one of the examples that we've seen? So let's maybe look at this one from neurosciences. So, it follows the general to specific, right? Because first we've got the general topic of Alzheimer's. Then more specifically, we dive into like how Alzheimer has been studied, right? What sort of techniques have been used, right? And we talk about, the specific results that researchers have got. So it's general to specific. Everything flows like that, right? Each paragraph has a clear topic. So first we talk about Alzheimer's disease in general. Then we talk about 3 meta-analyses, right? About Alzheimer's disease. Right, so when we move to a new topic, we start a new paragraph, right? In here, we're moving to another new topic, right? So cortical regions, right? And how they are activated, right? That's a new topic, so we start a new paragraph, right? That's kind of how it works. And, we also want to link ideas together, right? For better flow and, to help the reader understand. So, for example, this sentence says mild cognitive impairment is considered as da-da-da. And then we have previous studies have reported that persons with MCI, right? So this with MCI provides a clear link to the previous sentence, right? We've got 3 meta-analyses, and then in the meta-analysis of, right, this clearly repeats the main topic and, allows to maintain coherent flow in here, basically, right? So that's how flow is maintained, and also linking words, right? So although, introducing contrast, right? And, also referring back to things like this group. Well, which one? The one that the writer has just mentioned, right? So you can also take a deeper look at this introduction and the other model, and also at any introductions that you have read recently. And basically, you can just highlight things and highlight how the writers here maintain coherent flow. And this analysis will really help you understand and become more aware of how you should maintain flow in your introduction, right? So it will be very, very beneficial for you. So you can do that right now, and pause the video and work through the flow of the model introductions or the introductions in your field. Now, we've got the overall structure of the organization, of the introduction, and you know how to maintain coherent flow in the introduction. So let's look at what the writing process will be like. So the first thing, is the overall structure. You want to be really clear on the typical structures, the elements, the length of the introduction that you need to follow. Because really, if you start building something without knowing what's the end product and what the structure should be, then everything will collapse, and all your work will just go to the bin, basically. So it's really important to put this initial structure in place, which is what we've done in this video, right? But then really what we need to do is kind of to reverse engineer the process of writing the introduction. So I think it's really helpful to actually start at the end of the introduction with your aim, right? Because the aim really is, is the climax of the story that you're telling in the introduction, is the culmination, is the kind of the main point of the story that you're telling in the introduction. So you want to clarify that first, because if you know what your aim is, then it's easier to build the other aspects. And then I think, once you have the aim, you want to reverse engineer to the justification for your study. So, what is the missing link in the literature that prompted your study, basically? What is the reason for your study? We've got the aim, but why? Why are you doing what you're doing, right? And this, this needs to kind of paint the scene for introducing the main character, which is the aim of your study, right? And then from then, I think we can reverse engineer to, what has been done thus far. So if you know what is missing, you can then paint the picture of what the researchers have done. Well, what are some of the key studies, some key results of previous papers? And then finally, you can think more generally, why is this topic important at all? So you can ask yourself overall why anyone should care about this topic at all. Why is it important for the society, for your field? Why, right? So as you can see here, we kind of reverse engineering things in here, because as I said, I think it's really helpful to start to understand who the main character of your story is. What is the climax, which is your aim? And then from that, it's much easier to build the other elements and maintain coherent flow. So now with that said, I'd like you to come back to the introduction blueprint that we used before and look at the My Notes and Ideas column just in here, right? So you will have deleted some of the elements from here if they are not used in your field. But now I'd like you to think, following this thought process that we went through, so clarify your research aim here, and then think why do I have this research aim? And then what are some of the key studies that, that show this missing link that I have here, right? And this gives you a really nice story, right? So we've got the main character, but why? Why do we have the main character? What has been done that makes the main character go on the scene, right? And then, why is this topic important at all? And that this can go in here, right? So you want to do that now. And Feel free to share your ideas in the community with us if you want feedback or on the collaboration calls. And then, if you're stuck, we can help you, right? So get down to work and write down some ideas and notes in here. And I'll see you in the following videos when we're going to write out your introduction. Hello everybody, and welcome back to week 3 of Research Paper Mastery. And in this video, we're going to talk about how you can introduce the topic and briefly review the literature in the introduction to your paper. So in the previous video, we mapped out the entire introduction and we brainstormed ideas. And now, step by step, we're going to fill in our structure so that by the end of the week, you will have written the entire introduction. So let's get started. What are we going to cover today? Well, first of all, we're going to briefly look at the purpose of the introduction. And then, we're going to look at how you can start the introduction and look at different manners that researchers use in order to start the introduction. And the start is very important because obviously that's where, you've got the reader's attention and you can either keep it or lose it. And then we're going to look at how you can present the importance of the topic and define the key terms in the introduction, and then how you can briefly review the literature. So what is the purpose of the introduction? Well, first of all, you've got to explain the importance of the topic. So really you need to, right at the start, tell us why we should care at all about your topic as readers, right? And this is also a very nice way to hook the reader and, and show why the reader should continue reading your paper at all, right? And then it's also common practice to define the key terms, right? Introduction is the place to do this if it's a key concept that is needed to understand the rest of your paper. And the introduction also serves to kind of situate everything within the context, right? So before you tell us what you did, we need to know what has been done so far and how your study is different, right? And the introduction provides this context. And then it leads to the problem as well, right? So you can't, tell us what the problem is before you've situated it in the context, right? So, this review of the literature and the context really leads us to a gap or a problem, and also to highlighting how your study is different and novel. And really, the introduction hooks the reader, right? So you can make or not make or break a positive first impression, right? So our aim is that the reader, continues reading and the reader clearly understands what's the contribution of your paper, why your paper is novel and everything. If you don't do that well in the introduction, then, that kind of confusion or negative first impression will carry on through your paper, right? So the introduction is very, very important. So first of all, how do you start the introduction? Well, there are basically 2 ways in which you can do that and in which most researchers typically do this. The first way is to highlight the importance of the topic. So basically, you want to tell us why the topic is important for your field or the society in general. And this is really good because straight away it kind of, hooks the reader and the reader understands why they should be reading about this topic. Now, a second way that in some fields some researchers use is to define the key concept or concepts, right? So basically, this is good because it tells the reader straight away what the topic is. And such a definition can also help highlight the importance depending on how you state the definition. So imagine your paper was about the Alzheimer's disease, right? So you could start the paper by saying, Alzheimer's disease is a neurodegenerative disease which every year contributes to X number of deaths, right? So with this sentence, you're killing 2 birds with 1 stone. You're providing definition, but at the same time, within that definition, you're already telling us about the importance of the topic, right? So these are basically 2 ways in which you can start your introduction, right? So let's look at each of them in turn and in a little bit more detail, starting with the importance of the topic. So there are three ways in which you can state the importance of the topic, right? The first one is importance for the society. So, you want to show how the topic is key for people or the world in general. And this specifically usually applies to, to certain topics in social sciences, environmental sciences, maybe economics, or things like that like where the impact is rather far-reaching for the rest of the society. Also medicine, so it's not going to apply to every single topic, but in a lot of disciplines this can be a really good opening for the of the introduction. Now the second way is importance for your discipline, and this can really apply to any field. It's not restricted to kind of topics that are important for the society or the world, right? Because in here what you're showing is that this particular topic has already been studied in your discipline a lot and has been key, and researchers have been paying a lot of attention to this topic in recent years, right? So that's the second way of highlighting the importance. And the third way is to highlight the importance as a problem. So you can, basically frame the topic as a problem that needs solving, and this is an important problem, right? So it's kind of combined with the importance for the society, because it cannot just be like a problem that nobody is interested in. It's typically, a big problem that needs solving, right? And that has some sort of impact for many people or the world in general, right? So let's see how this is done in practice, and I'm going to show you a couple of examples, well, 3 examples, one for each type of importance, and then we'll look at it together, and then we'll brainstorm ideas for your own paper. So first of all, let's look at the importance of the topic for the world or the society in general. Right, so you can see that this topic is about cancer here. This paper is about cancer, right? And, you can see that, straight away the writer says cancer is one of the major causes of death, right? And this, using the word major already highlights the importance of the topic, right? Another phrase is plays an important role in, right? So, they talk about, how many people are affected by cancer and so on. And then notice how we get from general to something more specific, because this paper is not about cancer per se. It's more about the therapies for cancer, right? So notice how this paragraph goes from general to specific, which is something that we've been discussing a lot, right? So that's the first way. Now, the second way is to show the importance of the topic for your discipline. So let's look at how this can be done. Right? So this paper is about teamwork in healthcare, right? And, straight away we've got the word importance. The importance of, is becoming increasingly apparent, right? That straight away highlights the importance of this topic for the discipline, right? Not for the world or the society in general, right? And, another phrase, it is crucial that. So these phrases are important because they tell the reader what is going on in this paragraph. They help you to highlight the importance, right? And the third way is to frame the importance of the topic as a problem that needs solving, right? And in here we talk about the underrepresentation of women, right? In the engineering profession, right? So we have a problem, the underrepresentation of women. And then the writer, explains why this is a problem, right? That the skill shortage threatens the future of engineering profession and so on, right? So, again, it's more about the field that this researcher is in, not the world or society, maybe in general. And it's more presented as a problem that needs resolving. So these were some examples, and I would like now to focus on your topic and think about the importance of your topic, right? And brainstorm some ideas. So I've prepared for you writing the introduction worksheet, and it's available in the materials section for you to download. And I'm going to open it here on the screen, right? So right above this video, you have materials section, and then you can download this worksheet, writing the introduction worksheet, right? And what we're going to do is just look at this table and do exercise 1. So in here you've got the 3 types of importance of the topic that we've just discussed, right? And the 3 examples that we've just discussed. What I'd like you to do now is think about your topic and, choose one of these types of importance of the topic, choose one, and then brainstorm some ideas. Now, I don't mean that you have to write the whole paragraph. You can just write your ideas in here in bullet points and stuff like this, right? So you can pause the video right now and brainstorm some ideas. And don't worry if if 2 of these 3 things don't apply to you. That's fine, but you should choose one which will apply to your topic and then try to list some ideas here. Now that you've done it, we can try to write it out. And in order to help you to write it, I've prepared a language cheat sheet, and it's also available in the materials section. It's called Language for Writing the Introduction cheat sheet, right? And I'm just going to open it here on the screen for you. Okay, so this is what it looks like, right? And in here, I've basically put the most common phrases for you for all the parts of the introduction. But for now, we're just going to focus, we're going to take it step by step and just focus on establishing the importance of the topic, right? And, I listed the 3 ways that we talked about and some useful phrases for each of those types of the importance of the topic, right? So now that you've got your ideas written in here, then take a look at the phrases and write 1 paragraph in which you're going to present the importance of the topic and use that language to help yourself so that, you don't have to struggle with the language, go off and look somewhere for the appropriate language. You've got everything that you need in here, right? So go ahead and do that now and write this part of the introduction. Now that you've written the importance of the topic, the next element is defining the key concepts, right? So there are basically 3 ways in which you could do this. So when do we want to define the key terms, right? You should define the concept or the term if, there are various definitions of it, right? Because if there are various definitions, then you need to clarify which one you're going to be using in your paper. You might also need to define it if the readers are, likely not to be familiar with the term or the concept. So if it's something that, your readers will know, then maybe you don't need defining it. Right? And also, if it's key to understanding your argument in the introduction, then you definitely need to define it, right? So these are the 3 reasons why we would define it. And the 4th one is that, you could also define it to replace the importance of the topic. So like with the example of Alzheimer that I gave you, if the definition can also be the importance of the topic, then let's define the key term straight away to kill 2 birds with 1 stone. Now, how are we going to define the key terms? There are basically 3 ways in which we're going to do this. First of all, we can do this with the importance, right? In the same paragraph, after we introduce its importance, right? Or maybe even kind of in 1 sentence, like the example that I've just given you, right? And we do this when the definition can be short. Like if you can define something in 1 or 2 sentences, then it's a good idea just to combine it in 1 paragraph with the importance of the topic. Now, the second way of doing it is in a separate paragraph, right? So let's say first you have a paragraph about the importance of the topic, and then you move to the definition of the key topic, the key term, right? And this is appropriate when, for example, maybe there are conflicting definitions, or like you need more space to define the key term, right? Because of its complexity, for example, as well, right? And the third way is to do it instead of the importance, right? So you just start the paper with the definition and you get straight to the point. right? So these are the three main ways in which you can define key terms. And, I want to look at them with practical examples as well, so you can see how this is done in different fields, right? So this is, a paragraph where we have the importance of the topic and the definition in the same paragraph. So let's take a look at it, right? So we've already read this paragraph. It's about the importance of teamwork, right? And the first sentence specifies the importance, right? But then, we define what teamwork actually means, right? It's an often used term and may be defined as blah, 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 right? And then the following sentence, in healthcare, it is crucial that further presents the importance of the topic, right? So we're combining the two things in just one paragraph to be more concise. Now, the second way of, defining key terms is in a separate paragraph, right? And this is how this can be done. So this is about Alzheimer's disease, right? And, in here, we just defining, first of all, Alzheimer's disease, it's characterized by, right? And then we're also defining, another related concept, which is mild cognitive impairment, right? And again, notice how it goes from general to specific, because really this paper is not going to be about Alzheimer's disease overall. It's going to be about mild cognitive impairment, right? But we need to start with Alzheimer's disease and then go more specific. So again, it's general to specific, right? And the third way is, instead of the importance of the topic, right? And, this is done when kind of the definition also kind of serves as the importance of the topic, right? So we're kind of killing two birds with one stone in here, right? And again, we've got phrases like is defined as, right? It refers to, right? And notice that, when we're defining this concept here, straight away we're framing this thing as a problem that will need to be resolved, right? So it's kind of the importance of the topic as well at the same time. So now that, you've seen how this is done in other papers, let's look at our writing the introduction worksheet, right? So we've done the first table, right? And you've written the importance of the topic, but now we want to think whether it's necessary for you at all to define the key concepts or terms. So ask yourself, which terms will I be using throughout that might require an immediate definition? And are there any key concepts whose definition I need to start right away to clarify any potential ambiguity? So if the answer to any of these two questions is yes, then you should proceed and write out a definition, right? So you then want to decide how you're going to do it, right? Are you going to combine it with the importance in one paragraph? Are you going to do it in a separate paragraph after the importance of the topic? Or are you going to do it instead of the importance of the topic, right? So you need to choose one of the three ways and then write your definition in here in this column, right? And I prepared for you, the language cheat sheet. And if you scroll down, you've got phrases for defining key concepts. Like this approach refers to, is frequently referred to, can be defined as, and so on, right? So pause this video right now and choose how you're going to define your topic, your key terms, and then define them in here. All right, so at this stage, you're kind of, I'd say 30% into your introduction, and we're getting to another important element now, which is briefly reviewing the literature, right? So first of all, how long should this be? Well, the length is sort of between 1 to 3 paragraphs, but you really want to check with papers in your discipline. And it also depends whether you're going to have a separate literature review section, because if you do have a separate literature review section, then of course the review of the literature in here, in the introduction, should be shorter, right? But it can also really depend on the field. So as I said, I've seen fields like, in some medical papers, the literature review is like 1 paragraph and that's it. In other fields, it tends to be a little bit more extensive, even in the introduction, right? Now, why do we want to do this? Well, this really provides the context for your study. It sets the scene for the story. It sets the scene for the appearance of the main character of the story, which is the aim of your paper, right? So it's very, very important. How are we going to do this? First of all, you want to take your research aim and from it derive 2-3 key themes that you need to discuss. Right? So if you're not sure kind of like which literature you should discuss or which papers, it always comes back to the aim of your study, right? That's where we go. And I'm going to show you more specifically how to do this in a second, right? And then you want to organize the themes from general to specific, ultimately leading to the research gap and to the aim of your study. So remember, like the whole purpose of this brief literature review is in the end to show what is missing, i.e. the gap, and to let the main character enter, which is the aim of your study, right? And then, you want to focus on one main theme in one paragraph and go from general to specific. So don't kind of have like 3 different main themes in one paragraph, because that's going to be confusing, right? You want to focus on just one and develop it from general to specific. And I kind of pointed it out in some of the paragraphs that we've seen thus far in this video. And you always want to keep the research gap and aim in mind, right? When you're reviewing the literature, right? Because the literature is supposed to help you highlight the novelty of your research. So that's what you need to keep in mind when reviewing the literature. And a good way to look at it is, general to specific, but I call it the inverted pyramid structure, right? And it's easier to remember like this if you just kind of imagine an inverted pyramid just flipped on its head, right? And this is how it works in the introduction. So we start with the importance of the topic. That's the most general, right? And the definition of key terms. Then we go more specific, and we've got literature theme 1 and then literature theme 2, right? The first theme has to be a little bit more general than the second theme, which has to be more specific. And if you've got a third theme, then it's got to be even more specific. And then we state the research gap or the problem, which is even more specific. And then enters the main character, so the pyramid apex, the top of the pyramid, and that's the aim of your study. So you're always going in that direction, right? That's where you want to be going all the time. So let's put this into practice, right? And come back to our writing the introduction worksheet, right? And now, we've got exercise 5 here, right? We want to define the main themes, right? So, remember that the main themes need to be really based on the pyramid apex, right? So on the aim of your study, right? That's where you're going with the whole literature review, right? So to give you an example, in here, in this paper, the pyramid apex was, processing induced changes in food proteins and forming amyloids during boiling of hen egg white, right? Now, what are the 3 themes that would need to be discussed here? If I just look at this topic, well, one theme is common food processing methods for amyloid formation, right? Because in general, I talk about processing changes in food proteins, right? Then, I want to talk about heating of egg whites, right? Because that's also my topic. And I want to talk about amyloid formation as well, right? And notice how, I group these topics from general to specific, right? I can't straight away start with amyloid formation when heating egg whites. That's just like too specific, right? That's almost the aim of the study, right? So we want to start more general than that, right? So now what you should do is in here in the last row, copy and paste the aim of your study and try to derive like between 1 and 3 key themes for the literature that you will need to discuss, and try to put them, from general to specific. Now, once you've done it, you want to brainstorm 2 or 3 sub-themes for each of the main theme, right? So, if we talk about common food processing methods for amyloid formation, like, well, what would be some of those food processing methods that you would need to discuss? Like 1 or 2 common ones that you would need to list here, right? And the same for other topics that you've listed here, and you want to, 1 is not enough. 3 is probably maximum that you need to talk about. So these are kind of more specific ideas related to the main theme that you've identified. Now that you've got it, organizing kind of the rest of the literature review will be really easy, because paragraph 1 in your brief literature review in the introduction will be the main theme number 1, right? The most general theme for the literature review. And paragraph number 2 will be the second one, paragraph number 3 the third one, right? And then in here you could just copy and paste your sub-themes and then try to organize these sub-themes again from general to specific, right? So the main theme is like the pyramid apex. That's kind of the main point of this whole paragraph, and you want to organize these sub-themes so that they lead to this main point, right? So you can go ahead and do that now, right? If you've done the previous exercises, you can just copy the main theme, copy the sub-themes, and think how to organize the sub-themes, right? And now that you've got it, right, you can start just writing out these paragraphs. And I've prepared, a lot of useful language for you in here for reviewing the literature review on this same cheat sheet that we've already looked at, right? So you can take a look at it and then write out the 3 or 2 paragraphs of the literature review in your introduction that you've brainstormed in here, right? And if you want feedback on them, you can of course post them in the community. You can come to the collaboration calls, if you get stuck or if you want feedback, and and I'll help you there. And for that, for now, that's it. And in the following video, we're going to look at the research gap, and we're going to look at stating the aim of your study. Hello everybody, and welcome back. In this video, we're going to talk about highlighting the gap and presenting the aim of your study. So at this stage, you've written more than 50% really of your introduction, maybe like even 70%, right? We've written the importance of the topic, defined any key concepts if it was necessary, and we reviewed the literature, which leads us to really to the main point of the introduction. And that's where, the main character of your story is going to enter the stage. So let's see how this is done. What are we going to cover today? Well, this will be a very short video. We're going to cover 2 main things. First of all, we're going to look at 4 ways of highlighting the research gap. And then number 2, we're going to look at how you can state the aim and importantly link it back to the gap so that the story sort of closes logically in the introduction. So let's look at the first thing, highlighting the research gap. So there are basically 4 types of research gap, right? The first one is lack of or insufficient research. So basically, not enough or no studies have been conducted on a particular, in a particular region, on a particular method, material or group of people. Maybe there's a lack of studies on a specific subtopic, or maybe there's insufficient research using a specific method, approach, or tool. Right? So in here, basically, we're talking about a lack of or insufficient research. Usually it's, insufficient research. Now, the second research gap can be controversy in your field or a lack of understanding, right? So in here, even though studies have been conducted, the results of these studies are conflicting or researchers disagree about a particular issue. And that's where you're going to enter the stage and solve this disagreement. The third one is limitations of previous studies, right? So all research has problems, limitations, and if you can identify them and then link your aim to those problems, well, then you've got a really good story there. And the last way to present the research gap is to specify a problem that needs resolving, right? So this usually refers to like specific real-world issues that need solving and haven't been solved yet, right? Ideally, you want more than one type of research gap to justify your study, right? So if possible, try to have more than one. Now, this is in theory, but let's look at how this is done in practice, right? So let's look at lack of research on a specific aspect of the topic in here, right? So remember that there are different types of lack of research. I'm not going to go through all of them, right? But I'll show you one, which is lack of research on a specific aspect of the main topic. So let's look at this paragraph, right? And, you know, what we have here is, you know, to the best of our knowledge. So this is a nice phrase to kind of, you know, be cautious, right? Because if you just say like, you know, there are no studies on this, well, maybe there are. It's like, to the best of your knowledge, there aren't at the moment, right? So this is a very common phrase. And, you know, it talks about like how processing intensity has not yet been included as a variable, right? So this specific aspect of the topic has not been done yet. And also, you know, studies so far have been focused on something different, right? Rather than what we are going to do, right? So this specific aspect of the topic, insufficient research has been conducted on. So that's one example. And this is an example of a research gap that is a controversy in the field or a lack of understanding. How does the writer express it? Well, through a phrase like little is known about, right? So straight away, you know, we are saying that we are not sure yet about something, right? And then the writer says it is not clear whether, right? So these two phrases clearly indicate that there is a lack of understanding at the moment. Now, the third type of a research gap is limitations of previous studies. So let's see how this is done. Right? So in here, you know, we have a very small sample, right? That's a first limitation. And then we've got, you know, another limitation, right? Previous research does not explain why, right? So that's another limitation of previous research. And it does not generate specific recommendations to something, right? Now, the last type of research gap is specific problem that needs solving. Let's look at an example. Right? So in here, you know, first of all, the writer introduces a method, right? And then in the second sentence, they say, however, you know, this method is unpractical. And then they give a reason why this method is impractical. And then furthermore, they introduce, you know, another potential method, right? While it is in principle possible, but this while straight away indicates that there's going to be a problem with this method, right? This one also remains unpractical, right? And then the writer explains why it's impractical. And then they introduce another technique, right? And then they say that this other technique also, you know, has a problem. It suffers from low production, right? So the gap in here is in terms of like problems with that needs resolving. These are real world problems, you know, not so much, you know, problems with previous studies, but problems with like, you know, technology or things that are used in real world to solve problems, and they don't work as well as we would like them to. So hence, you know, we're going to propose a different method that might work better. So now, you know, that you understand how the research gap works, let's look back at our writing the introduction worksheet, which we've looked at also in the previous videos, and I've included it in the materials section above this video. So let me just pull it up on the screen here for you. Right? So you should have done all this, right? You've got the literature as well, right? Now what we're going to do is the research gap. So basically, you know, you should have a good idea of the research gap from week 1 of the program, because that's where we talked about your research topic and we've specified the research gap, right? So you could basically just copy and paste it here below. Now, if you haven't done that, then you'll have to do that now. And basically, you know, what you need to do is pick an appropriate research gap which fits kind of with your topic, and then write your notes here. So of course it will be impossible to, you know, to have all of these research gaps for one topic. That's not the purpose. If possible, try to have more than one. So try to have two, right? Or maybe two types of one research gap, right? And write your notes here. Don't worry about writing full sentences here. It's just kind of notes and ideas, right? Now, once you've done this, then we want to look at the language cheat sheet that I've already shared with you previously, right? And in that language cheat sheet, you have some useful language for writing the introduction. And we need to scroll down. So we've got the literature review, right? And here we've got language for rationale and main aims, right? So we've got identifying lack of research, right? So that's the first type of a research gap. And you've got a lot of phrases for it. A lack of understanding, right? And again, a lot of phrases, right? So take a look at these phrases, right? And then what you want to do in here is write out the research gap in one paragraph, right? And use the phrases from here so that you don't make mistakes, right? And so that you don't have to search for the language and you're just more efficient with your writing. All right, and do that right now. And then we're going to move on to stating the aim. So now that you've got the research gap written out, well, that's when it's time for your main character to enter the story, right? And that's where you're going to like wrap up the story of the introduction before we move on to the methodology, right? And this is stating the aim of your paper. Now, there are three ways in which you can state the aim of your paper. First of all, and probably that's the most common way of stating the aim, is just a sentence. So it's always something like this paper aims to, or the objective of this paper is, the aim of this paper is to, something like that, right? And that's probably 90% of all papers in all disciplines will use that. Now, another way is to have research questions, right? And in some disciplines that might be common, although to be honest, I haven't really seen it that much in research papers. Now, the third way is a hypothesis. And this is also much less common than a statement of aim, but it is nevertheless seen in some fields. I've especially noticed this to be very common in economics, right? And a hypothesis is something like, it is predicted that, or it is hypothesized that, something along those lines, right? Now, you just want to choose one of the three, right? So a mistake that I see some people make is that they have an aim, then they have a research question, and they have a hypothesis. They kind of have like all three, but you don't need all three because each of them basically serves the same purpose. They're exactly the same thing. It's just that they are written in a different way, right? So what you want to do is observe how researchers in your field typically state the aim, and then you just want to follow that convention. So if researchers in your field typically use a hypothesis in the papers, then you want to use the same. And then importantly, you want to link the gap, right? You want to link the aim, to the research gap. There's got to be a logical connection, right? If there is, and that connection, of course, is in terms of the topics that have been discussed in the research gap and now come to the surface again in your aim, but the connection can also be made visible through linking words like as a result, therefore. So let's look at how this is done in practice, right? So in here, you've got the aim as a statement, right? The aims of the study were to, and we state basically the aim in one sentence. We can also do that as research questions, but as I said, probably not very common in research papers, but maybe you'll find it in your field. So do check. Now, notice that in here, usually the first sentence, right, is is a general aim, like this study aims to, and then more specifically, and we give the research questions, right, in here. And also notice at the very beginning of this sentence how we have bearing this in mind. So this clearly links to the research gap. And now the third one is presenting the aim as not as research questions, sorry, but as a hypothesis. How do we do that? Well, right in here you've got the hypothesis being put forward is that, right? We state the hypothesis. And then in the second sentence, we've got a second hypothesis, right? The barrier role is hypothesized to be da-da-da, right? So that's how you can do this as a hypothesis. Now, as I mentioned, it's important to refer back to the gap. You don't always have to do this. If you look here, it's not really done here in any obvious way. Of course, the topics of the hypothesis, are clearly connected to the gap, right? But there is no kind of word or phrase that will link back to the gap. So you don't always need to do this, but I think it's good practice. It just further consolidates the coherence of your story. So how can we do this? Well, we could simply use a word like therefore, right? Therefore, the purpose of this study was to, right? And then we just state the aim, right? And there are many other linking words like consequently, or phrases like bearing this in mind, taking this into account, and so on, to refer back to the gap. So let's look back at our writing the introduction worksheet. And so you've got the research gap written out here. Now let's look at the aim. So, the first thing to decide is how you're going to express the aim. As a statement, as a research question, or as a hypothesis. So you want to check with papers in your field and then write your aim in here, right? And I've also given you some useful phrases, right, for writing the aim in here, right, as a statement or as a hypothesis. So I've given you phrases, and then you've got phrases for linking the aim to the research gap as well. So at this stage, really, you've basically got almost a complete introduction to your paper. Now, in some cases, it might be appropriate to state the main results and the main contribution and the structure as well of your introduction. This might not be the case for you. If this is not the case for you, then basically you're done here. And what you want to do is skip the following video and move on to the checklist as well for writing the introduction before you submit it. So the checklist is available in the following lecture in the materials section, and you can download it there to revise your introduction before you submit it for feedback. And you can submit it for feedback through the community. You can also come to the collaboration calls and speak to me there and ask me any questions, right? And for those of you who need to still present the results and the contribution or summarize the organization of your introduction, we're going to do that in the following video. So I'll see you there. Hello and welcome back to week 3 of Research Paper Mastery. And if you got to this point, well, congratulations, because you're almost finished with your introduction. And in this part, we're going to wrap up your introduction and get it ready and finished. So let's get started. What are we going to look at today? First of all, I'll show you how to present the main results and contributions in the introduction, which is an optional element that some researchers include. And then I'll show you how to outline the structure of the paper, which again, it's an optional element that some researchers include. And then importantly, we're going to look at how to check for coherent flow, and I'll give you your introduction checklist, right? So basically, if you do not present the main results and contributions and you do not present the structure of the paper, what I would really recommend that you do is that you skip to the last part of this video where I talk about the introduction checklist and how to use it to check that you're maintaining coherent flow. This will be really, really useful for you, right? And if you are presenting the main results and the structure in the introduction, well then let's dive right in together and I'll show you how to do that. So the overall structure of the introduction, just as a quick reminder, right? We've got the importance of the topic at the very beginning. We've got the definition of the key concepts, right? Then we have the overview of the literature, the research gap, the aim of your study, and this is what you've done so far. Now, optionally, you can present the main results and contributions, right? Basically, what are your key findings and how do they contribute to the literature, or how do they contribute in practice, right? And this is in some fields, journals, you know, kind of really good to present, really useful for the reader, because straight away the reader knows kind of why your paper is important and what's the novelty of your paper. And the structure of your paper is also an optional element, right? It basically shows how the paper is structured. So let's look at these last two optional elements in more detail. So let's look at how to present the main results and contributions. So when do you want to write it? Well, it will be easiest to write really at the end, once you have written the results, discussion and conclusion of your paper, right? If you've got it very clear in your mind, you could also write it now, and then come back to it afterwards. But really, it's probably easiest to write at the end. Now, what is the purpose? It's really to get the reader's attention right from the start, you know, by highlighting your key contribution, you know, and your key results and so on. The length is typically just one paragraph. So like most things in the introduction section, it's just one paragraph. And when it comes to the grammar, you typically used past simple. So like we found or we showed, but sometimes present simple is also used. And this typically happens, I've noticed, in economics, for example, right? In most other fields, people used past simple in here because, you know, it's the results you got in the past, right? And what do you need to present? Well, basically the key findings and the contribution. Potentially, you might want to present the method if the method was important or the key to obtaining those results, right? And you could also think about any vital implications of the results, practical, theoretical implications of those results, right? This is, you know, a mixture of these three things is what people typically present in that paragraph. So, you know, this was probably a little bit theoretical. So let's just look at a practical example in here, right? So this is an example from the Journal of Monetary Economics, right? And it's the paragraph where they present the results in the introduction section. It's at the end of the introduction, right? So you can see in here that they use the present tense, like, and straight away at the very beginning they say what they found, what's the main result. We find that, da-da-da, right? And then they further explain it, like due to, right? And then they talk about the practical implication, like this policy forces all adjustments, da-da-da, right? Now, they also kind of remind us like what they did, a little bit of the method. So we also analyze something, right? And, you know, and then in the last sentence, they state the second main results, right? So in here, in this paragraph, what we see, like two key things is like the use of present tense. And number two, we also see that they really focus on the results of the paper. There isn't much about like practical implications of the results, for example, or there isn't much about the method, right? Now, on the other hand, if we look at this paragraph, right, this is more from like food scientists, and the journal is Biomacromolecules, right? Again, it starts with, you know, we here show, right? So, you know, that's the results. And again, notice the present tense, right? We here show that, right? And then, you know, they talk about the methods, right? So like fibrillary structures were extracted from, right? Probably because, you know, it's important, the method is important to understand the results as well, right? And, you know, again, the key contribution is stated, like we successfully used something. So it's kind of the methodology, but also the key contribution, right? And were indisputably identified as. So in here we see like, you know, a mixture of the key results and the methods used to obtain those results, right? And that's something that you could do in that paragraph. Now, in some cases, right, people also present key implications apart from the results, right? This is from the Journal of Structural Geology, so a different field, right? So, you know, they say what was analyzed, and then they say like, you know, why these areas are basically important, right? Or what in practice are important for, right? Developing geometric understanding, right? And the topic has significant importance for, right? So in here, what the writer shows is like, you know, the results that we're going to get, or the results that we got, excuse me, are very useful. They're important in practice, right? They've got like practical implications for a lot of people. And it's important to tell the reader that to keep them interested and help them understand why they should read the paper. Right? Similarly, in the last sentence, the specific lessons learned have broader impact for, right? So in here we have a, you know, more of a focus on practical implications rather than the results per se. And that's something that you could do, you know, at the end of your introduction. So now let's look at two things. So first of all, you know, our writing the introduction worksheet, which, you know, you've been working on for the last couple of lessons, and I put it in the materials section right above this video, but you should already have a copy filled in, right? Because we've done most of it already, right? So I'll just scroll down. This should all be filled in because you will have done it in the previous days, right? And we're now on point 11, right? So presenting results and contributions, right? So the three things that we can present is key result, how you obtained it, and the importance of the result, the contribution or the implications of that result, right? And I've got an example here for you, which you have seen, right? These fibrils were indisputably identified as amyloid fibrils, right? And then we've got how we obtain those results as well. There is no importance of this topic or that there's no implications of it in here, right? So it doesn't mean that you have to fill in all three columns. Sometimes it won't be possible, right? So what I'd like you to do now is to, you know, fill in this table with your key result. So you will definitely have to list the key result. That's for sure. Now you can decide whether the method was the key. If the method was important, then you can list it here. And, you know, if the result has important implications, contributions and things like that, then list it here. And again, don't worry about writing, you know, coherent sentences. You can just list ideas in here, right? Now, when it comes to writing, I prepared for you the language for writing the introduction cheat sheet, which we were working through, right? I don't know why this doesn't open for me. It's also in the materials section, right? So you can download it there again. And I've prepared some language for you that I think will be useful, right? So if we scroll down, highlighting the main contribution, right? So you've got some really good phrases here that can help you do this, right? So now, you know, you've got your ideas, you've got the language that you will be using. So in here, you know, I left some space for you to write your paragraph or just write it in your introduction document. And then once you finish it, you can, you know, give it to us for feedback or come to the collaboration call and we'll help you out. Right. Now you've presented the results, so the last optional element is to present the structure of the paper. Again, this is something that, some researchers do, others don't. You will have analyzed papers in your disciplines to know whether you should do it, whether it's appropriate or not. So let's talk about it in a little bit more detail. Again, when to write, really it's easiest to do at the end, once you have written the whole paper. I mean, you can do it now as well, because you probably know what the rest of the paper will be like, but it's easiest to do at the end. The purpose is to help, of course, the reader understand the organization, right? And the length is typically 1 paragraph. And the tense that we use is present simple, right? Most of the time. Sometimes maybe you will see will, so like, the second section will focus on, but most of the time, 99% of the time, is just present simple. So the second section presents blah, 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 right? So in here, I've got a paragraph for you, right, with the structure of the paper. And let's look at it together very quickly. So it comes from the same paper from structural geology that we've already seen, right? So it does seem that in geology, geosciences, they do like to present the organization, right? And it starts with, very simply, this paper is organized as follows, right? And then step by step in each sentence, they basically talk about one section. We outline the model in section 2, in section 3 we derive something, in section 4 we present the key results, right? And, we use numerical methods to characterize in section 5, right? So, and then, are given in section 7. So notice that it's, it's very, very simple, right? And that's how it should be written. It's brief, it's to the point. Don't give people too much detail. Be concise. Use, maximum 1 sentence for each section. And that's it, right? And it should go from the first to the last section. Now, in the language cheat sheet, you will have useful phrases for this, presenting the organization of the paper, right? So for the overall organization and step by step what is discussed in each section, right? And I've given you the phrases in here, so you can just use these. And as I said, present simple is used most of the time. So now, really, the last thing that you have to do is write that paragraph that presents the structure. And this should really take you just a couple of minutes, if you use these phrases. And even if you haven't finished your paper, give it a go right now, because you probably know, you've already planned your paper. You know what's going to go into the sections, that you'll have the methodology and you'll present the main results and so on, right? So give it a go right now. And if you need feedback, come to the Q&A calls and the community, and I'll be very happy to give you some more feedback on it. Now that's, at this stage, you've written the entire introduction. But before you kind of give it to other people for feedback, I think it's really important to develop your own feedback skills, right? Because the whole goal of us being here together is that you become a completely independent academic writer, independent researcher who is able to do all of this on their own and, never needs to ask people in the future for help. That's our whole goal. And in order to achieve that goal, apart from slowly gaining the writing skills, you also need to be able to notice your own mistakes and then correct those mistakes. So that's why I prepared a checklist for you in here that I would like you to use, right now before you send the introduction for feedback. Now, what kind of things do you need to check for yourself before you give it to anybody else? First of all, you need to check the content, right? So you need to make sure that you included all necessary elements and that your introduction provides clear context for the rest of your story, right? So the content needs to be right. And you're the expert in the content, so you should know best. But you can also try to connect with other members of the group who might be in the same field as you are, and you can brainstorm the content with them as well. Or of course you can ask me, and I'll be very happy to brainstorm that with you. Now you need to check the flow as well. So you need to revise the structure to ensure that the development is logical and that you are maintaining logical links between ideas, right? And we talked a lot about it in this module, but we also talked about it in week 1, right? And so you can refer to the pinup that I gave you there, maintaining flow and telling a coherent story, because that pinup explains further, how to do this. And I shared this pinup with you in week 1. And then you want to check the language, right? So you want to ensure that you've used the correct vocabulary. So use the language cheat sheet that I've given you. It's there for you to help you to avoid mistakes, right? And you want to check grammar, that you've used correct grammar. How are you going to do that? Well, I've prepared an introduction grammar cheat sheet for you, right? And it's a PDF document, and I included it in the materials section just above this video, right? And let's just very quickly go over it to explain what you're looking for, right? So there are basically, 3 tenses that you're going to be using: present perfect, present simple, and past simple, right? And that's 99.9% of all academic writing is that. And really 90% is either present simple or past simple, right? That's how simple grammar is here, right? When you present the importance of the topic, you will use the present tense, in phrases like, something plays a key role, something is relevant to. When you're talking about things that are generally true, right? Overall. And then you will use present perfect to talk about how much research has been done on a topic. So like when you're highlighting the importance of the topic in your field. What is present perfect? Well, it's things like have paid, have been conducted, right? So you don't have to remember the name. It's just this tense where you have, and then the third form or the past participle of the verb, right? So these are the 2 tenses you want to use in the importance of the topic. So when you're revising it, right, and proofreading your text, pay attention to that. Now, when you're defining key terms, right, you're going to use present simple, right? So X is typically defined as. Past simple will only be used if you're referring to a specific time in the past when something was defined, like X was first defined as, right? And then when you're reviewing the literature, you're going to use different tenses. So you can use present perfect to talk about work that started in the past and has continued until now, right? Or was done recently. For example, several studies have shown that, right? Another common phrase is more recent research has found that. So with words like recent or recently, we often use present perfect. But that's about it. This is the only situation. Now, much more commonly, you're going to be using past simple, sorry. So you're going to be talking about like what a specific study showed or found or how it was conducted, right? So you found that. They used a novel approach, right? And then you can use present simple to talk about theories, arguments, suggestions, and things that are generally true. Like this theory posits that. Gonzalez argues that, it's his argument. This suggests that, these compounds are typically derived from R, right? Now, when it comes to presenting the main results, sometimes, present simple is used in some fields to present the results, as you've seen in the examples that I showed you, right? But you want to check what people do in your field. But it would be basically, we showed that, we find, so on. Definitely, present simple is used to talk about the implications and contributions, like these results suggest, the findings highlight, right? And then past simple is used most commonly to present results. We found, we observed, right? To present the main results, present simple is used most commonly. This paper is organized as follows. Section 3 shows, and then sometimes will be used instead. Results will be presented. Don't mix the two. Choose one and use it, right? Don't mix present simple with will. So that's the grammar, right? And you want to use it to check your grammar. But now let's look at the entire introduction checklist, right? And it's a Word document. It's available in the materials section right above this video, and it's called Introduction Checklist, right? So before sending your introduction for feedback to anyone to assess, you've got to assess the quality yourself and correct it, right? That's obligatory, because that's the only way that you're going to start becoming an independent writer. That's the only way that, you can improve, if you start paying attention to your own mistakes. So I've divided it into content, coherent flow, and language, right? These are the main things you want to be looking at. So first things first, check that it's approximately 1,000 words, so that it fits the word limit that you identified, in day 1 of week 3. Check that, you don't include obvious claims that everybody knows widely, right? You don't want to have stuff like that. That's kind of redundant, right? Check that you've identified the research gap and showed why your study is necessary. That's crucial. Is the aim of your paper stated clearly? And is the aim logically connected to the research gap? Now, did you repeat any ideas? Are you concise in your paper? Check that, Sometimes people have a tendency to say the same thing twice using different words. Don't do that. You don't have space for that. Is your literature review critical, argumentative, rather than just descriptive? Check that, right? What you also want to check is coherent flow. What I mean by that, first of all, you want to check if you've included all the typical elements in the correct order. That's kind of the basic thing, right? Now, you want to check your paragraphs. Is your paragraph about one idea or about many ideas? It should be just about one idea, right? And that main idea is got to be in the first sentence. Check it. Check if you've developed your paragraphs from general to specific. That's the usual way to develop them. It's not the only way, but that's how they should be usually, right? Are there clear connections between your ideas in paragraphs, like different types of connections? And remember, we discussed them in week 1, so you can go back there to revise. Do you have connections between paragraphs, right? And, is the literature review clearly connected to the research gap? And then finally, the language. Have you used the correct tenses throughout? Look at the grammar cheat sheet that you've got here. And then, have you used the phrases from the useful language cheat sheet? So this cheat sheet. If you haven't, then do and correct, right? So that's your last task for now. Check it. And then once you've checked it and, you want feedback from someone, post your text in the community and say that, you're looking for feedback in exchange for giving feedback to someone else. This is really beneficial because it helps you to develop as well your feedback skills. Or you can, of course, come to the collaboration calls and get feedback from me as well.